My name is Dale. I'm 53 years old. Been a journeyman lineman for the better part of 30 years. Most of that time spent right here, in the rolling hills and deep woods of western Pennsylvania. It's a good job, an honest job. It's kept a roof over my family's head and food on the table. It's also a job that puts you in some strange places at strange hours. You get used to it. You get used to the dark, the weather, the solitude. You learn the sounds of the woods at night, the difference between a deer blowing and a branch cracking under its own weight. You learn to trust your gut, but you also learn that your gut can play tricks on you when you're tired and it's 3 a.m. I'm telling you all this because I need you to understand that I'm not the kind of guy who goes looking for things. I'm not a ghost hunter, not a Bigfoot enthusiast. Before that night, if you'd told me a story like the one I'm about to tell you, I'd have smiled, nodded, and figured you'd probably had one too many, or were just pulling my leg. I'm a practical man. I believe in what I can see, what I can touch, what I can fix with a set of tools. But what I saw that night, it didn't fit. It still doesn't. And telling this, putting it out there, it's not something I want to do. It feels like picking at a wound that never quite healed right. But my wife says I need to, that keeping it locked up is doing more harm than good. So here it is. I'm not asking you to believe me. Honestly, most days I'm still not sure I believe it myself. All I can do is tell you what happened, exactly as I remember it. Before I get into what happened, if you're new here, consider subscribing. I share stories like this regularly. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I always like to know who's listening. All right, let me tell you what happened out there on the Henderson line. It was late October, a few years back. We'd had one of those violent early-season storms roll through. Not snow, but a vicious mix of ice and wind that came screaming down out of the north like it had a personal grudge against the power grid. Trees were heavy with the last of their leaves, and the freezing rain coated every branch until it looked like glass. It's a recipe for disaster in my line of work. The calls started coming in around 9 o'clock that night. Whole townships going dark. By midnight, it was an all-hands-on-deck situation. I'd been working for about 6 hours straight, mostly clearing smaller limbs and restoring single-phase laterals. Around 2 a.m., dispatch sent me out to a particularly nasty one, a big outage affecting a rural stretch east of the Allegheny National Forest, the Henderson Line. It's a rugged, isolated area, mostly hunting camps and a few year-round residents who like their privacy. The main line runs parallel to a state route for a few miles before branching off into the woods, following a series of old service roads that are little more than muddy tracks. The initial report was a phase-to-ground fault, likely a large tree or limb down on the primary. Standard procedure. I gassed up the bucket truck, grabbed a fresh thermos of coffee that I knew would be cold before I got halfway there, and started the long drive out. The rain had stopped by then, but the wind was still howling, and the temperature was dropping fast. The main roads were slick with black ice. It was slow going. By the time I turned off onto the service road, the woods closed in around the truck like a tunnel. My headlights cut a shaky path through the darkness, reflecting off the ice-caked branches that hung low over the road. It was beautiful, in a treacherous sort of way. Everything looked like it was made of crystal, but it's a deceptive beauty. That ice adds hundreds, sometimes thousands of pounds to the trees. It's a waiting game of what's going to snap next. I found the spot soon enough. It was obvious. A massive white pine, probably 100 feet tall, had failed about halfway up. The top half had sheared off and fallen directly across the 3-phase line. It was a mess. Wires were sagging almost to the ground, insulators were shattered, and the downed treetop was a tangled wreck of branches and pine needles.
The air had that sharp electric smell of ozone, the ghost of the fault. I parked the truck, positioning it so the boom could reach the span, and put on my flashers. Their rhythmic pulse of orange light against the icy trees was the only thing moving out there. I just sat for a moment, sipping my now lukewarm coffee and planning my attack. This wasn't a quick fix. First, I'd have to call dispatch, get a clearance and a hold tag on the line. Then I'd have to cut up and clear the tree.
Only after that could I even begin to assess the damage to the conductor and the hardware. It was going to be a long, cold night. I remember looking out the window at the wall of black that was the forest. It was one of the quietest nights I've ever experienced. The wind had finally died down to just a whisper, and with the power out, there was no hum from transformers, no distant traffic, nothing. Just the tick, tick, tick of the engine cooling and the occasional drip of melting ice. It was a deep, profound silence, the kind that feels heavy. That was the first thing that was off, but I didn't register it as wrong at the time. I just registered it as quiet. I pulled on my gear, hard hat, harness, gloves. The cold was biting, the kind that feels like it's seeping right into your bones. I stepped out of the warm cab and the air hit me like a slap. My breath plumed in the beam of my headlamp. The world was just this little circle of light around me. Everything else was absolute black. I did my walk around, checking the truck's outriggers, making sure they had a solid footing on the frozen mud. Safety first, always. You don't cut corners, not out here, not when you're alone. I got on the radio, my voice sounding small in the immense quiet. Dispatch, Unit 7, on site at the Henderson line fault. Got a large pine across all 3 phases. Going to need at least a few hours here. Requesting clearance. The voice of Sarah, the night dispatcher, crackled back, tinny and distant. Roger that, Unit 7. Stand by for clearance. While I waited, I started staging my tools. Chainsaw, cutters, grips, a come-along. I laid them out on a tarp beside the truck, the metal clinking softly in the stillness. It's a routine I've done 1,000 times. The familiar actions are comforting. But the silence was starting to get to me. It wasn't just quiet, it was empty. Usually, even on the coldest nights, you hear things. An owl, a lone coyote, the rustle of some small creature in the underbrush. There was nothing. It was like the entire forest was holding its breath. I remember shaking my head, telling myself I was just tired. 30 years of this, Dale. Don't get spooked now. The radio crackled again. Unit 7, you are cleared and tagged on the Henderson 33 kV line. The line is open, de-energized, and grounded at the substation. Call back when you're in the clear. Roger that, dispatch. Unit 7 is starting work. I fired up the chainsaw. The roar of the 2-stroke engine felt like a violation of the silence, but it was also a relief. It was a normal sound, a working sound. I started cutting into the downed treetop, slicing the smaller branches first, clearing a path to the main trunk that was pinning the wires. The work was hard and physical, and I fell into the rhythm of it. Saw, toss, step. Saw, toss, step. The smell of fresh-cut pine and exhaust filled the air. My headlamp beam bounced and danced, throwing crazy shadows into the woods. After about 45 minutes, I had most of the smaller stuff cleared. I shut off the saw to take a break and get a drink of water, and the silence slammed back in. But this time, it was different. It wasn't empty anymore. I had that feeling, the one you get on the back of your neck, the primal animal feeling of being watched. I froze, standing there in the debris, and slowly scanned the tree line with my headlamp. The beam cut a narrow tunnel through the darkness. Ice-coated branches, dark trunks, patches of frozen ground. Nothing. I told myself it was a deer. They'll stand dead still and watch you just on the edge of the light. Their eyes will catch the beam. But I saw no eye shine, no movement. Still, the feeling persisted. It was a heavy, oppressive weight. I took a long drink from my water bottle, the plastic crinkling loudly. I tried to listen past the pounding of my own heart, and that's when I heard it. It was a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't a snap of a twig. It was a heavy, deliberate thump, and then another. It was the sound of something heavy walking on 2 feet, not 4. My brain immediately tried to explain it. It's another hunter. Maybe his camp lost power and he's walking out. But at 3 a.m.? Through this mess? It made no sense. I called out, my voice sounding shaky. "Hello? Anyone there?" The only answer was the echo of my own voice, and then that smothering silence again. I stood there for what felt like a full minute listening. Nothing. I figured my mind was playing tricks on me. Exhaustion, cold, solitude. It's a potent combination. I decided to get back to work, to let the noise of the saw chase the ghosts away. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept glancing over my shoulder, scanning the darkness beyond my little island of light. I finished cutting the smaller limbs and moved on to the main trunk. It was thick, maybe 2 feet in diameter where it lay on the conductors. I'd have to make several cuts to section it and roll it off the lines. I revved the saw and bit into the wood. Chips flew, the engine screamed. I was focused on the cut, watching the bar sink deeper into the pine. And then the saw sputtered and died, out of gas. I swore under my breath. It was a rookie mistake, not checking the fuel before starting a big job. Annoyed, I set the saw down and walked back to the truck to get the gas can. The silence was back, instant and absolute. As I reached the side of the truck, I happened to glance down the service road, back the way I'd come. My headlamp beam sliced through the night, and that's when I saw it. It was about 70, maybe 80 yards away, standing just at the edge of the woods where the road curved. At first, my brain didn't process it. It was tall and dark, and my first thought was, it's a bear. A big, black bear, standing on its hind legs, curious about the noise. We get them all the time. They're usually more scared of you than you are of them. I stood still, waiting for it to drop back to all fours and wander off. But it didn't. It just stood there. And the longer I looked, the more my brain started to reject the bear explanation. It was too tall. Even a massive bear on its hind legs isn't that tall. This thing was easily 7, maybe 7.5 feet tall. And it was slender, lanky even, not bulky like a bear. Its shoulders were broad, but its waist was narrow. The proportions were all wrong. It had long arms that hung down past its knees. My mind scrambled for another explanation. A person. Some guy in a weird costume, maybe a ghillie suit, playing a prank. It was a stupid thought, but it was more plausible than what I was looking at. I raised a hand and shouted again, "Hey, you need some help?" The figure didn't move. It didn't react at all. It just stood there, a dark silhouette against the icy trees. The flashers on my truck pulsed, and in one of the brief flashes of orange light, I saw something that made the breath catch in my throat. The head. It wasn't human. It wasn't a mask. It was long, with a pointed snout, like a wolf or a German shepherd. And on top, 2 pointed ears, silhouetted perfectly against the lighter sky. I felt a wave of cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. This was a deep, primal fear, the kind that turns your blood to ice water. My brain was still fighting, still trying to make it make sense. It's a trick of the light. It's a weirdly shaped, broken tree stump. You're exhausted, and your eyes are playing tricks on you. But I couldn't look away. I was frozen to the spot, my hand still on the side of the truck. And then it moved. It took one step out of the woods and onto the service road. It wasn't the lumbering waddle of a bear. It wasn't the walk of a human. It bent its legs in a way that I can only describe as backward, like a dog's hind legs, a digitigrade gait. It took one step, then another, moving into the center of the road, directly into the path of my headlights. It was deliberate, and it wasn't a stump. It wasn't a prank. It was real, and it was looking right at me. The thing stood there, bathed in the full glare of my truck's high beams. And for a few seconds that stretched into an eternity, I got a good, clear look. I wish I hadn't. The memory is burned into my mind like a brand. It was covered in fur. Not thick and shaggy like a bear, but shorter, coarser. A matted, dark gray and black, like a timber wolf. But it was patchy. I could see pale, grayish skin underneath in places, especially around its ribs and joints. It was lean to the point of being gaunt, all sinew and bone and knotted muscle under that thin coat of fur. Its arms were impossibly long, ending in what I can only describe as hands. They were big, with long, slender fingers, but they were tipped with thick, yellowed claws, like a dog's but bigger and sharper. It held them slightly curled at its sides, but the legs were the worst part. They were bent like a canine's, with the hocks halfway up. It stood on its toes, its feet long and narrow, ending in those same wicked claws. That backward bend, it was the most unnatural thing I've ever seen on something with a humanoid torso. And the torso was vaguely human. Broad shoulders, a defined chest, a narrow waist. But it was too long, too stretched out. And then there was the head. It was purely, unmistakably canine. A long, tapered snout, filled with teeth that I could see even from that distance, because its lips were pulled back in a silent snarl. The teeth weren't just fangs. They were a mix of canines and something that looked horribly like human incisors, all crowded into that long jaw. Its eyes caught the light of my headlamp, and they didn't shine green or yellow like a deer or a cat. They glowed a deep, dull red, like the embers at the bottom of a fire. There was no reflection. It was like the light went in and just died. And there was intelligence in those eyes. This wasn't a dumb animal. It was looking at me, sizing me up. It knew I was alone. It knew I was afraid. I could feel its awareness like a physical pressure. The smell hit me then. The slight breeze had shifted, carrying its scent to me. It was foul. A thick, gagging mix of wet dog, rotting meat, and something else. A coppery, metallic smell. The smell of old blood. My body was completely locked up. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My entire being was consumed by a single screaming thought. This is impossible. My lineman's brain, the practical problem-solving part of me, was completely offline. All that was left was the lizard brain, the part that knows a predator when it sees one. It felt like minutes passed. It was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. The thing just stood there, watching me. Its head tilted slightly as if it was curious, as if it was trying to figure out what I was. And then it lowered its head, dropped smoothly onto all fours, and the sight was even more horrifying. It wasn't a crawl. It was a fluid, powerful crouch, like a sprinter settling into the blocks. The transition from 2 legs to 4 was seamless and terrifyingly fast. On all 4s, it was still huge, its back coming up to my chest, and it started to move toward me. Not a run, a slow, deliberate walk, a stalk. Each step was silent, its clawed feet making no sound on the frozen dirt of the road. It was closing the distance, and my island of light was shrinking. That's what broke the spell. The movement, its slow, predatory advance. My legs unlocked, and I didn't think. I just reacted. I wasn't a lineman anymore. I was just prey. I turned and scrambled, not for my tools, not for the chainsaw, but for the cab of the truck. It was the only armor I had. My feet slipped on a patch of ice, and I went down hard on one knee. A sharp, searing pain shot up my leg. I remember the sound of my jeans tearing and the wet, cold shock of the muddy ice against my skin. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just knew it was coming. I pushed myself up, ignoring the pain, and lunged for the driver's side door. My gloved hand fumbled with the handle. For a terrifying half-second, I thought it was locked. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it would break them. Then the latch gave, and I threw myself inside, pulling the heavy door shut behind me. The thud of the door closing was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. I slammed the lock down with a shaking hand. I was hyperventilating, fogging up the inside of the windshield. I scrambled across the bench seat away from the driver's side, pressing myself against the passenger door as if I could melt through it. My headlamp was still on, its beam jumping around the cab, illuminating the radio, the scattered paperwork, the thermos of coffee that had rolled onto the floor. And then the truck rocked. A heavy, violent jolt that slammed me against the passenger window. It wasn't the wind. It was an impact. A deep, guttural sound rumbled from outside, a sound that vibrated through the metal of the truck and into my bones. It was a growl, but deeper and more resonant than any animal I've ever heard. It sounded like it was coming from a barrel chest. Then I saw a flash of movement outside the driver's side window. A dark, clawed hand slapped against the glass. The claws, thick as pencils, screeched against the safety glass, leaving long white scratches. I could see the wiry fur on the back of the hand, the tension of the knuckles. It was right there, inches away. I let out a sound, a choked-off whimper. Another jolt, this time from the back. It was circling the truck, testing it. I heard a metallic clink and my blood ran cold. The handle of the utility box on the side of the truck. It was trying the handle. It was testing for a way in. This thing was smart. It wasn't just a brute. It was a problem solver. The scratching stopped at the window, and a moment later its face appeared pressed against the glass. Those glowing red eyes stared into the cab, into me. Its breath fogged the outside of the window, a ragged patch of condensation that matched my own on the inside. We were just 2 feet apart, separated by a 1/4 inch of glass. I could see the details of its face, the leathery black skin of its snout, the way its nostrils flared, the yellow-stained teeth. It opened its mouth and I saw a long, dark tongue. It wasn't panting. It was breathing slow and deep. It knew it had me trapped. The truck rocked again, more violently this time. It was on the bed of the truck now, behind the cab. I could hear its claws scraping on the metal floor. The whole truck groaned under its weight. This was no bear. A bear that big would weigh close to 500 pounds. This thing, lean as it was, had to be heavier. It was solid. The boom, the heavy hydraulic arm of the bucket, was right over the cab. I heard a sound that I will never forget. A low, continuous, high-pitched creak. The sound of metal under immense strain. It was trying to move the boom. It was trying to crush the cab. The creaking of stressed metal was the sound of my coffin being built. My mind, which had been a screaming void of panic, suddenly found a single, sharp point of focus. The keys. They were in the ignition. The engine was off, but the battery was live. I had to start the truck. I had to get out of there. I lunged back across the bench seat, my injured knee protesting with a fresh bolt of pain. My hand, shaking so badly I could barely guide it, reached for the ignition. Outside, the groaning of the boom intensified. The truck shuddered and I heard a pop as a piece of trim or a bracket somewhere gave way. My fingers closed around the key. I turned it. The engine roared to life, the diesel clatter filling the cab, and for a second, it was louder than my fear. The headlights, which had been on battery power, brightened to their full intensity. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of it. It was standing on the truck bed, both hands wrapped around the base of the boom, muscles in its long back and shoulders bunched and straining. It was trying to tear the boom from its mounting. The moment the engine started, it froze. It turned its head and looked directly into the cab through the rear window. The red eyes narrowed. It let go of the boom, and in one fluid motion, it leaped off the back of the truck, landing silently on the ground. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I slammed the truck into drive, my foot mashing the accelerator to the floor. The heavy tires spun in the mud and ice, whining for a moment before they found purchase. The truck lurched forward. I didn't go back the way I came. I drove forward, right through the mess of branches and debris I had cut. The front of the truck smashed through the smaller limbs, the sound of snapping wood like gunfire. A large branch scraped down the side of the truck with a sound like giant fingernails on a chalkboard. I didn't care. I just kept my foot down. I was looking in my mirrors, trying to see if it was following. The service road was narrow and winding. The headlights illuminated a frantic, swaying tunnel of trees. I saw it once, just a flicker. It was pacing the truck, running effortlessly through the dense, icy woods to my right. It was keeping up. It was a gray blur of motion, weaving through the trees with impossible speed and grace. It wasn't even breathing hard. It was just loping alongside me, its red eyes occasionally catching the light. I pushed the truck harder, the engine screaming. I hit a bump, and the whole truck went airborne for a second, slamming back down with a crash that rattled my teeth. My coffee thermos flew across the cab and smashed against the passenger door. I finally broke out of the woods and hit the paved state route. I didn't slow down. I fishtailed on a patch of ice, corrected, and floored it. I looked in the mirror again. The entrance to the service road was a black maw behind me. There was nothing there. It was gone. I drove for 5 miles, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, before I could even think about slowing down. I pulled over to the side of the road, the truck still running, the flashers still going, and I just fell apart. I started shaking uncontrollably, a deep, full-body tremor. I put my head on the steering wheel, and I think I cried. I don't really remember. It was just this overwhelming flood of terror and relief. After a few minutes, I got my hand steady enough to pick up the radio mic. My voice was a hoarse whisper. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. There was a pause, then Sarah's voice, calm and professional. "Go ahead, Unit 7. Everything all right? You were supposed to call in when you were clear." I took a breath. What could I possibly say? "Sarah, I'm clear of the line. I'm on Route 322, about 5 miles west of the turnoff. I need a sheriff's deputy to meet me. Now." There was another pause, longer this time. "A deputy, Dale? Is there a problem? Did you have an accident?" "No accident," I said, my voice cracking. "Just send someone, please." I waited for what felt like an hour, but my truck's clock told me it was only about 20 minutes. Every shadow seemed to move. Every whisper of the wind against the cab sounded like claws on metal. I kept the engine running and the doors locked. I just stared into my rearview mirror. watching the empty road behind me. Finally, a pair of headlights appeared, followed by the familiar red and blue flash of a light bar. A county sheriff's vehicle pulled up behind me. A deputy got out, a young guy, looked like he was barely 30. He walked up to my window, cautious, his hand resting near his sidearm. I powered down the window. He shined his flashlight in, his face. When I finally ran out of words, he just stood there for a moment. "All right, Dale," he said, his voice calm and steady. "You've been working a long shift. It's cold, you're out here all alone. The mind can play tricks on you." "It wasn't a trick," I said, my voice pleading. "It was real. It tried to get in my truck. Look at the side." He walked around the truck with his flashlight. He ran his beam over the long white scratches on the driver's side window. He looked at them for a long time. Then he walked to the back of the truck. He shined his light on the bed, on the base of the boom. "See any damage?" I asked. "There are some scuffs on the bed liner," he said, his voice non-committal. "And the scratches on the window could be from a branch. You said you drove through some debris." "A branch didn't try to open the utility box," I insisted. "A branch doesn't have hands." He came back to my window. His face was sympathetic, but his eyes were full of doubt. "Listen, Dale, the biggest predator we have out here is the black bear. A big male can get up to 600 pounds. They can stand on their hind legs, they're curious, and a storm like this can make them act erratically. I think you saw a very large, very spooked bear, and your mind filled in the blanks. You're in shock." I just stared at him. A bear. He wanted it to be a bear. It was easy. It was simple. It fit into his world. What I saw didn't. I was too tired to argue. What was the point? I just nodded. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, a bear." "I'll follow you back to the yard," he said, "just to make sure you get there all right. You should get that knee checked out, too." I had forgotten all about my knee. I looked down. My jeans were torn, and there was a bloody, ugly gash on my kneecap, surrounded by a dark, angry bruise. The deputy filed a report. I saw it later. "Civilian assistance. Subject, Dale, my last name. Reported encounter with an aggressive animal, possibly a large black bear. Subject was distressed but unharmed, save for a minor injury sustained in a fall. Advised subject to seek medical attention. No further action required. Animal encounter. That was it. My terror, the impossible thing in the woods, reduced to a single, neat, bureaucratic line item. It was like it never happened. But the scratches on the window were real. The dent in the utility box where something had pulled on the handle was real. And the memory in my head was real. The next day, the supervisor called me into his office. He was a good guy, known him for 20 years. He had the report on his desk. He asked me if I was okay. He said the company required me to see a doctor for the knee and to talk to a counselor, a standard procedure after a stressful incident. I went. The doctor stitched up my knee and gave me a tetanus shot. The counselor asked me if I had a history of anxiety. I told them both I saw a bear. It was easier. It was what they expected to hear. I took a few days off. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing red embers staring at me through the window. I saw the backward legs, the silent, predatory walk. I kept the lights on in the house. My wife knew something was wrong, more wrong than just a spook from a bear. I finally broke down and told her everything, sitting at our kitchen table at 2 a.m. I expected her to think I was crazy, but she just listened. She held my hand and she listened, and she believed me. That probably saved me. When I went back to work, I requested a transfer off the night shift rotation. I couldn't do it anymore. The thought of being out there, alone in the dark,
was unbearable. I made up some excuse about my age, about wanting a more regular schedule. My supervisor didn't question it. I think he knew.
Or maybe he just didn't want to know. I started looking things up on the internet late at night when the house was quiet. I typed in things like tall creature with a dog's head and werewolf sighting in Pennsylvania. I felt stupid doing it, but I had to know if I was the only one. I found them, the stories, dozens of them from all over the country, from Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Kentucky, and Pennsylvania, especially in the forested mountainous regions. They called it the Dogman. The descriptions were chillingly familiar. 7 to 8 feet tall, canine head, humanoid body, digitigrade legs, glowing eyes. The same details over and over from people who had never met, separated by hundreds of miles and decades of time. Loggers, truckers, hunters, hikers, people like me. Normal people who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time and had seen something impossible. Reading their stories didn't make me feel better. It made it worse. It made it real. It meant that what I saw wasn't a hallucination. It was a real, physical thing that exists in the dark places of the world. And it's smart. And it's a predator. I never went back to that service road. Another crew was sent out a few days later in broad daylight to finish the job. They found my chainsaw right where I'd dropped it. They said the rest of the treetop had been cleared off the lines, not cut, just moved. Huge sections of the trunk, hundreds of pounds each, had been tossed into the woods like they were firewood. Their report mentioned unusual tracks, but they were muddled in the mud and melting ice and ultimately dismissed as being from a bear. Always a bear. I'm telling you this story because I have to, because for years it's been this toxic secret, this lump of cold dread in my gut. And maybe, just maybe, someone else out there has seen it too. Maybe you're sitting there right now, listening to this, and the hair is standing up on your arms because you know. You know I'm not lying. You know I'm not crazy. What was it? I don't know. I've read all the theories, an undiscovered species, a demon, a government experiment, a creature from another dimension. None of it makes any sense. But then, a 7-foot-tall wolf that walks on 2 legs doesn't make any sense either. All I know is what I saw. I know it was intelligent. It didn't just attack. It observed me. It stalked me. It tested my truck looking for a weakness. It was hunting. And I know it was strong. The way it shook a 10-ton utility truck, the way it bent the metal of the boom, the way it tossed those logs around. That's a level of power that is terrifying to comprehend. My life is different now. I don't hunt anymore. I used to love being in the woods, the peace and the quiet. Now I can't look at a dark tree line without my heart starting to race. I can't hear a dog bark in the distance without a jolt of pure fear. I see it when I close my eyes. I see it in my dreams. Sometimes I'm back in the cab of the truck and the glass is cracking. Sometimes I don't get the door closed in time. The world feels thinner than it used to. The barrier between our brightly lit, orderly lives and that other thing, it's not as solid as we think. We build our towns and string our power lines, and we pretend we've tamed the wild. But there are still deep, dark woods out there. And there are things in those woods that have been there forever, things that watch us from the shadows and remember a time before we existed. I believe that thing on the Henderson line has been there for a long, long time. And I believe it's still there. So if you ever find yourself on a lonely road deep in the mountains and your car breaks down, if the woods suddenly go dead silent and you get that feeling on the back of your neck, don't rationalize it. Don't tell yourself it's just the wind. Trust that feeling. Get back in your car, lock your doors, and get out. Don't be a hero. Don't be curious, just leave. Because you might not be as lucky as I was. You might not get the door closed in time. The image that haunts me the most, the one that wakes me up in a cold sweat, isn't the face at the window. It's that moment just before, when it was standing in my headlights, tilting its head. That moment of intelligent, alien curiosity. It was looking at me, and in those horrible, glowing red eyes, I saw a complete and total absence of anything I could recognize as natural. It was ancient, and it was hungry, and I was in its world. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to my very soul, that if it had really wanted to get to me, that truck wouldn't have stopped it.